All right, so I watched the Vice documentary yesterday, which was very interesting. Obviously, it's hard to consolidate so much information that happened within the 3HO cult, the cult started by Yogi Bhajan, the Kundalini Yoga cult, whatever you know it by, or maybe you don't know it at all. And for you, this might be, I'm not sure if this is like a great entry point. You might want to go watch the documentary first. But you're welcome to listen and see if this makes sense anyway. But I'm assuming that you, the listener, have some, backstory as to what I'm talking about, which is why you maybe clicked on the video or wanted to listen to the podcast. Because this is available in both formats. So if you don't know about my YouTube channel yet, which is also called Inspired Artist Podcast, you can check out the video version of that just in case you want to watch my lips move as I talk. I don't know. So anyway, I watched it last night with my partner who's never been in a cult, but who has heard a lot of it from me, and who has, so sweetly watched like a million other cult documentaries with me as I've tried to process this chapter of my life that I am attempting to heal and process and work through and ultimately, move forward from. But it highlighted what I feel to be like the two most, from my perspective, I guess, the two most like egregious things that happened, which were the ickiest for me to realize that I had unwittingly participated in, which are, well, that I unwittingly participated in sort of the promotion of this cult via my music. That was super upsetting. But that the cult had been responsible, the cult, Yogi Bhajan, had been responsible for the rape of numerous women, many who have not even come forward, I'm sure, because the fact that anyone should have to come forward and put a face to their traumatic story is just beyond unfair in my mind. And yet I am so grateful that the women who were part of that documentary chose to. Now, the two women who were part of the documentary, I'm talking about Bhajan and Nadine, who were part of the second generation of 3HO kids who were sent to India. They did not say that they had been raped, but they felt like it was going that way. They had definitely been inappropriately spoken to and touched and groomed for this position of being one of his concubines. Who was Premka, Pamela Sahara Dyson, who wrote the book that sort of catalyzed all of these stories coming forward yet again, because they had come, people were talking about this, but it was very much suppressed and very much not believed. Really sad. I did not know about either the stories or the fact that people weren't believing them. I heard rumors of things, I think, but the main thing that I was aware of during my involvement with 3HO was that these kids in India, who some of them were my friends, had had really awful experiences in India. And I don't think I knew the extent to which that was true, because, they didn't talk about a lot of it. But it angered me that their experience had been so bad. I don't know that they made the connection that this was happening because of Yogi Bhajan. My assumption was always, they might have, but my assumption was always just that they had been sent off to India for this wonderful purpose, and that, maybe there had been some poor management, maybe like Yogi Bhajan had been trusting of some really incompetent people over there, and they had made those gross errors when in fact, the line started with him and everybody was sort of kowtowing to his protocols. So it was a direct reflection of what was going on in the cult, as opposed to, some mysterious traumatic experience that we don't know how this could have happened, But, these kids were sent off. And honestly, I don't want to pick favorites, but this is like, I think the hardest thing for me, and probably for a lot of people in the cult, to kind of come to terms with, is just how anyone thought it was okay to send over their 2-year-old, their 5-year-old, their 6-year-old. It makes me want to start weeping as I talk about it, to a foreign country, to India, where they didn't see their parents sometimes for years on end. I mean, one of the guys in the Vice documentary, Tage Steiner, talked about sending his kid off when he was 2, and then when they finally saw him again, the child didn't recognize his own parents. And he was really obviously very remorseful about it, and I felt really badly for him too. And having been part of this cult, this experience, I have deep compassion for all of the people that were involved in it. I mean, I feel like because I didn't suffer as these kids did, and I didn't suffer as the women who were raped did. I didn't have any of those kinds of experiences. I think I'm definitely able to see this from, kind of a wider lens, as opposed to like a very specific, this is what happened to me lens, which, doesn't make my perspective better. It just makes it a little bit different from some of the people who spoke in the documentary. And, from my perspective, it's like, I can see how manipulatable these people were. I had been manipulatable. When you enter this sort of arena, when you get into the land of cult, when you get into the presence of somebody who claims to have the answers to everything and very well seems to, and then the community that surrounds this person amplifies that idea, because now you're in a situation where not only somebody claims to know all, but all of those that are around you are also believing that they are. And it's kind of this like self-fulfilling thing, because you believe because the person next to you believes, and they believe because you believe, and they believe because, and the other person next to you believes because the other person that they're with believes. And everybody just has this assumption that everybody is, in 100% in agreement with the decisions, the choices, the lectures of this person. And so, you see enough people wearing white, and it seems like they're living a fantastic spiritual life, and they figured it all out. You sort of enter that illusion, and everybody works to uphold that illusion together. And that's the power of the cult. It is an alternate reality. And, and from kind of like I don't know, I guess like the very like, the strange way that I think about things, it's like a cult is a culture, right? Cultures believe things, and as groups of people, we do uphold beliefs that, maybe for centuries, continue to be relevant or continue to be used, even though they become irrelevant, So we can see even in just normal society how we uphold principles and beliefs that actually serve us not at all, but we continue to live by them because everybody seems to think that this is okay, This is a really stupid example, but just something that comes up the top of my head. For Easter, like as a society in the US, we seem to think it's okay to waste like millions and millions of eggs so that our kids can color them. But they don't come into the world thinking that they want to color an egg. We instill that as part of our culture into them, and then they want to do it, and then this is normalized because everybody does it. And so that's sort of a stupid example, but like hopefully you get what I'm saying, that like we can see kind of objectively that the wasting of millions, possibly billions, I don't know, of Easter eggs, because like how many hard-boiled eggs can you really eat, is normal. It's made normal. It's like, well, that's what you do for Easter, even though it's extremely wasteful and ultimately like not good for our planet, not good for, and not good for us, nobody. So went off on kind of a tangent there, but I think that it's important to bring in like concepts that we as a society can see are normalized and sort of stupid when we look at other people from the outside and we go, how could they possibly believe that? You go, well, you believe a lot of things that really aren't relevant to your life, don't make a lot of sense, but you continue to do them. Not you personally, but we all do. We continue to accept things that perhaps we shouldn't, but we do because they're normalized and nobody seems to be up in arms about them, So you can imagine how it would get to the point where you would have such trust in a system, in a people, where a whole community of people is saying, like, for the betterment of our children, we are going to send them off to a school in India where they will become spiritual masters or whatever. It's difficult, I suppose, from an outside perspective to see that as anything but child abuse, but I get it. I get why someone would have thought that, and I get what sort of state of mind you would have needed to be in to do that. And like Shabbat in the documentary was talking about, there was not a little bit of pressure that the people, the cult members, put upon each other to do this. It was like, are your kids going to India? Well, why not? Well, my kids are going to India. Like, don't you want the best for them? What's wrong with you? Don't you trust in what we're doing? And then the thing that is interesting is, I also watched that documentary, as I talked about in my last podcast, with it was called Bad Vegan, with the raw food woman, Sarma Melangalis. And, from that standpoint, it was like the amount of money she was willing to give. She kept giving more and more money. And the more money she gave, the more it had to be true, because the worse it was going to feel if it wasn't, right? The more she became invested in it, the more she had to invest. And I think, it's like, how much more important are your children than money, right? So if you can imagine how, how you would, if you can't conceive of how you could give millions of dollars to somebody, I just think about what it's like to give your child up. I mean, I don't know if I had like a real point to that, but just, I guess, the fact that, we sort of see how people can get financially scammed, because maybe that's a little bit closer to our reality. I'm not talking about myself, because I've definitely been spiritually scammed and not just financially scammed, but it's harder, I think, maybe for people who have never had that happen to them, to see how you could be spiritually scammed. But gosh, I mean, I have a friend who grew up in a Christian family. She was part of some kind of strange Christian sect, and all of the parents one day decided that dolls were false idols, and they brought in all their kids' toys and burned them. That seems kind of abusive too. Not as traumatic probably as sending them off to a foreign country, but I don't know. I'm just trying to kind of give some context for the crazy things that humans do, and how this could have happened, So anyway, I mean, I have a 6-year-old, so hearing that a 6-year-old is by themselves, just living day to day with a 6-year-old, and the innocence and the preciousness of their thought processes, and their need for affection, and their need for encouragement, and their need for safety and love. It breaks my heart to think about someone being sent off at that age and younger to fend for themselves, So that was really hard to hear. I knew it, of course, I knew, and I've heard I've read some disgusting accounts that other people have posted online in this secret group, not secret, but it's a private group online called Beyond the Cage now on Facebook. And what's kind of strange about, to me, strange, but it makes sense, I guess, is that so many of these stories are being shared within closed doors, quote unquote. So many of these stories are being shared in spaces where only people who sort of know about them already can hear them. And I understand why that is. It's very vulnerable to share, stories of sexual abuse. That's, like I said in the beginning, I mean, I've had to give an account of being abused, and it's disgusting. Like, nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to have that happen to them, and nobody wants to have to tell it over and over again, especially at the discretion of the person you're talking to, probably not believing you. I mean, that is horrific. So I can't even believe that so much time went by before people were willing to listen to these women. Like, I mean, Nadine said like 30 years, this happened to her, and people were not believing her. People didn't believe Pamela. The Kate, oh, it's not coming to me, but there's an actual, Pamela had an actual lawsuit, but Kate, it's not coming to me, but she Yogi Bhajan anal raped her, while her sister held the door. I think I've talked about this before. And, she had a lawsuit, and they settled out of court, and it was reported to the community that the charges had been dismissed. And that, she was a liar. So there was this building in the community of this story that, basically, I guess the spiritual practice was too much for them, and, they just went crazy, or like they resented Yogi Bhajan for his mastery, or just all these convoluted, like, nonsense stories. And I really thought that it was interesting that the documentary editors or producers, I'm not sure who made that choice, maybe they interviewed other people and they just didn't find their narratives as compelling, but they basically pitted, I'm going to say pitted, but I mean basically, because they took basically the two viewpoints, right? They took the non-believers, in the sense of not believing that any harm had occurred, and then the believers. And they had more of them, to their credit, I'm glad. And, the people who were still wearing their white clothes and their turbans and chanting Satanama, like, from my perspective now, I'm like, yeah, they look crazy. But I know from their perspective, as they're chanting this, like, they're thinking like, I am amazing and regal and, and doing God's work on earth. But it's still, I can't understand how deluded somebody has to be in order to deny that much evidence. I mean, it's one thing if like one person had come out, but like that it gets to a point where you're like, the investment that you have made, and like I'm talking about this investment, it's like the more you invest, the more you have to invest, right? The investment that they've made is so great. I mean, they have sacrificed their entire lives, right? It was Dharma and Fateh. They have sacrificed their entire lives to this cult, and it's all they have. While I empathize that it must be very difficult to turn around and, admit that you're wrong, because ultimately I feel like it's just a huge ego trip, like they're afraid that their ego is going to shatter. And, that must be hard. That must be hard. But I don't know, that's a lot of evidence to ignore. It's a lot. But anyway, I thought it was interesting that they pitted these two men against basically these two women, right? So you had Nadine and Set Pavin, who were talking about this very real abuse that happened to them. And then like the two non-believers who were these men. And I thought it was nice that they also invited two other men. So it was interesting the way that they selected their interviewers, I thought, or interviewees. Because then there were these other two men, Shabbat and Tej, who were on the side of the women who believed. And then there was this other perspective from Pamela, which was, a first generation person who had actually helped in solidifying a lot of the infrastructure that I then would come in and participate in. And I feel for her too. Nadine rightfully is very upset with Pamela because she participated in a lot of the harm that happened to her directly, but ultimately, I also understand from Pamela's perspective that she was a victim of undue influence, right? She was brainwashed and she believed just as much as any of the other people that this man knew what he was talking about, and she had kind of unerring faith in his decisions. And ultimately, it must not have felt right to her because she did end up leaving. So there must have been this sort of breaking point. And she talks about that in the book. Oh, wow. One of the other things that was so interesting to me was when they talked about the businesses, and they talked about Yogi Tea, which of course I knew about. There were a lot of businesses. And Pamela talked about how the businesses would sort of get to a certain point in their profits, and Yogi Bhajan would go in and have the businesses signed over to the cult, to the organization. Yogi Tea, someone said in the documentary, I can't remember who it was grossing like $1 billion a year. I think that's right. So I am very thinking, okay, $1 billion a year. They have like hundreds of ashrams all over the world. This is like copyrighted manuals and things that they're selling to all these teacher trainings all over the world. They have a lot of money. There's a lot of money somewhere. And it's funny because when I was part of the cult, I never got the impression that there was a lot of money. Maybe you can relate to this. Like, I would never go to a gathering like Solstice and go like, wow, there is so much wealth here. It's like there wasn't, in strange ways, and like people, sort of being pressurized to buy like $500 malas and things like that. And, expensive swords and knives and turban material and whatever. But the environment did not suggest to me that this was a wealthy organization. And yet, in some respects, it must have been. So I'm going like, where did this money go? Like, who's the person with the bank account that's like stuffing all this money in their pockets and never showing up to a community event, or maybe they were and I just didn't know who they were. I would love to know the answer to that, because they didn't really talk about where that money goes. They just talked about how it made so much money. I realized it went to Yogi Bhajan at the time, but there is no Yogi Bhajan. And to my knowledge, it doesn't go to his wife because of the lawsuit. Does it go to the woman who's now the head of Sikh Dharma International, or whatever they changed it to, Sikh Dharma Worldwide? Yes, Bubbles. I'm recording. Okay. Speak of my 6-year-old. He showed up. And he's doing handstands in the back on my wall now. So yeah, the money part's really interesting to me. And I know there was like a lot of discussion around there being some corruption involving the board of the for-profit businesses. There's also a call security. That was all happening kind of around the time when I joined. In 2011, there was like this separation of the people who sort of stood by the elected, or the people who were managing the for-profits, and then those who were, I guess, more like community leaning, and there was just this rift. And I remember that happening. Still would love to know, the documentary that needs to be made about this community is like 10 hours long. I think this Vice thing was like 40 minutes, and it just sort of barely scratched the surface of what was going on, because also, it didn't even talk about like the toner scams and like all of the, the businesses that were illegal and the drugs. And I mean, it was very mild version of what happened. And also, it didn't interview anyone who was actually violently raped, probably because that is who wants to get up on TV and do that, honestly? And I mean, that's one of the things that just makes me sort of livid about these people that say we don't believe these women because, they're lying and they just want attention or whatever. No woman wants that kind of attention. I mean, okay, maybe like, I don't know, some crazy, like a few crazy people, I don't know. But most women do not want attention for, making up a rape. That is not the kind of attention anybody wants. You don't get good attention from that. That's an insane, I'm recording. What is going on? Okay, sorry, getting a little interrupted and they're gone now, and I realized I was using that word. I don't think my 6-year-old knows what that means. He also doesn't usually pay attention to me when I talk, so that's that's positive. But yeah, that's not the kind of attention someone would want. That's ridiculous. And I thought it was really funny because they didn't even say that. Like, I can't remember who it was, either Fateh or Dharma, but he was like, they imagined these things. It's such a strange thing. It's not even a good argument. I've heard the one where like they got paid, which seems like a strange one too. I mean, I don't know. Anyway, it obviously it's ridiculous. And I hope that anybody watching the documentary saw how ridiculous that position would be. Also, I think the fact that they included that Yogi Bhajan lecture where he talks about rape and how it's every woman's fault that she gets raped, basically, was probably the nail in his coffin for most viewers, I would think, because I mean, if you really want to discredit Yogi Bhajan, just quote him. That's it. That's all you got to do. You just have to go into the archives and take all of the disgusting things he said, and that's it. And there were a few sort of like universal nice truths, and definitely I don't think that everything he said was bullshit, but most of it was. So, anyway, Vice documentary, I recommend going and seeing it because I hope that it will be one of many documentaries that are made about this community. Like I would love to see a series like they did for the NXIVM cult. I thought that was really well done, and I'd love to see something that was in depth as that, because it was like a series as opposed to a film. I don't think you can in a film do much credit to a story like this. It's just too big. The scope is too wide, and you have to kind of talk about each thing in its own compartment, I think, because you have to understand all sides of it. So, yes, I'm almost done. So yeah, my wish is that some more complete information comes in, more complete reporting comes in about this, and also that gets translated into other languages, because I think that a very good job has been done of just ignoring this story in most places besides the United States. I would also like to see the part of the story where Harijiwan, Steve, comes in with, Guru Jagat and creates a whole like secondary cult that lives on and continues to brainwash people and indoctrinate them and basically, enslave them. That's a bad word, but what's the word that I'm using for looking for, like get them to work for them without much compensation and a lot of grief. in the same way that Yogi Bhajan did. There's nothing new there, but it's interesting how he's been able to kind of use the backlash that's happened since the Premka book to his advantage to bolster like a new cult that stands very firmly in this. We are those who truly believe, and we will not falter from, what the master told us, quote unquote. So I think that that's a very interesting thing. There's so many areas that we can look at, and I'm definitely not an expert in most of them, but I would love to have heard more of the women's stories because I've read them and they are horrific and beyond a shadow of a doubt not made up. And very interestingly have a lot of overlap. It sounds like the same person, so all right, well, I'm going to leave you with that, and would love to hear what y'all thought about the documentary. If you watched it, please let me know in the comments of the video if you did, and what you thought was well done, what you thought wasn't well done, what you thought they missed, and if there's anything that I forgot to talk about the documentary, please feel free to comment about that too. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, you can always go and do that when you rate the podcast and leave a comment. So, all right, I will talk to y'all in the next episode. See you later. Bye.